Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight, and thanks for joining the League of Women Voters of Bloomington and the League of Women Voters of Dakota County for our Earth Day event. We have an Earth Day event every year, and we're excited to have it this year for the first time at St. Stephen. I want to thank Lois Norgard. Lois leads League of Women Voter Bloomington's Earth Day event every year, and this is her brainchild, so thank you, Lois. I want to thank our volunteers. We had a lot of volunteers put this together, including, and I don't think this includes everybody, but including Addie Matson, Aline Mosler, Denise Royer, Faye Cogshaw, Carlene, Catherine Husted, Marcy Woodruff, Molly, and Paula Clark. I want to thank Suzanne Kienitz for designing our flyer, Cub Foods for our refreshments, Bloomington Cable for filming for later cable and YouTube broadcast. And I want to thank St. Stephen Lutheran Church for providing our space tonight. The League of Women Voters is a nonprofit political organization that never endorses any political party or candidate. The League, as a grassroots organization, however, conducts consensus studies involving significant research and analysis, and then creates positions based on that research and analysis. The League of Women Voters has long and detailed positions on environmental issues, and you can Google them and read them. I'm not gonna repeat them all here. With respect to natural resources, though, the League of Women Voters believes that natural resources should be managed as interrelated parts of life-supporting ecosystems. Resources should be conserved and protected to assure their future availability. Pollution of these resources should be controlled in order to preserve the physical, chemical, and biological integrity of ecosystems and to protect public health. The League of Women Voters supports strong regulation to protect our natural environment, and I do encourage you to look at the League's positions online. Although our speakers tonight aren't speaking on behalf of League of Women Voters, we think it's critical that they be heard on a variety of issues surrounding pipelines. No speakers here are representing pipeline companies, and we're not focusing on things like whether oil should be transported by rail or pipeline. Those issues are well covered in the news. The speakers who are here tonight represent various dimensions to the issue that do bear consideration. Before we get started, this forum is fast-paced and tightly timed, and so please withhold any clapping or verbal statements in reaction to any statement by the moderator or any speaker, or anything that might cause any interruption or delay that may impact the ability of other members of the audience to hear, and also that might interfere with the video recording. Also, questions for the speakers are invited, and they should be in writing. Audience members are invited to write members on the note cards that have been provided to you. Please hand your question cards to a League volunteer. We'll make every attempt to cover all of the topics of interest that are indicated by the cards that are submitted. And questions are welcome during the panel discussion. So now I'll introduce Lois, who's the lead organizer for the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to introduce our moderator for the evening. And so Robert Pilot is a proud enrolled member of the Ho-Chunk Nation. He teaches at Harding High School in St. Paul. He's a video production teacher, so he co-teaches Harding's award-winning drumline program. Robert's a musician and filmmaker, owning Pilot Productions Film and Video. He's also a producer and host for Native Roots Radio, I'm Awake on AM 950. That's on Saturdays from 2 to 3 every week, so you can catch his program there. He's a proud board member of MN 350 as well, working on climate change issues. Mr. Pilot graduated from the University of Minnesota with a bachelor's in career tech ed. He's been teaching at Harding High School since 1996. He's married and has 2 beautiful adult twin daughters, and his passions include protecting water and burial sites in Minnesota and across the nation. Mr. Robert is a water protector. He was a water protector at Standing Rock 3 times. And with that, I'd like us all to welcome our moderator for the evening, Mr. Robert Pilot.
Thank you. That was really nice. I think I wrote that though, but that was good. I want to first thank the League of Women Voters for having me and asking me to be here and partake in the Earth Day Forum, Pipelines and Impacts. I want to thank Redbone for coming out here. That's so right on. They told me, this forum is a nonpartisan forum. And that's okay with me because there's an old native saying, an old Indian saying, and it goes, the left wing and the right wing are from the same bird. So I don't have a problem with being nonpartisan, and I think the two people that were running for president didn't mention too much about Standing Rock, so that bodes well for me. My journey, I'll just tell you a quick, my journey of activism for water and our native people, our first people, pre-America. I'm a high school teacher. I'm on the parent committee for St. Paul Public Schools, the Indian Native American Parent Committee. And this year was something special because we went non-concurrent with the school district. And when nothing changes, nothing changes. And I think hopefully they're going to get the big picture, and the next phase is a lawsuit with St. Paul Public Schools because our numbers are still staggering low and our people are still struggling. I think one of the things that Standing Rock brought to me in my heart is that there's still a 500-year war against Native Americans, and it has never ended. I look at footage and see things with my own eyes and see what the press calls as news. When I'm at a protest and there's 3,000 people and the local press say that there's hundreds and hundreds of people, I have a problem. When I'm interviewed and out of context with the local media, I have a problem. So with that in mind, my wife and I ran across AM 950 and they asked us to put on a show. And what we put on a show is called Native Roots Radio, I'm Awake. And what does that mean? Again, Standing Rock has awakened many, many people, as you'll hear tonight, including my wife and I. We brought our dogs out there, our little chihuahuas, and we have a picture of my wife standing with the camp and at Standing Rock, and in the background with all the beautiful teepees and the river with our chihuahuas, and I'll never forget that. That's something that I'll never forget. But back to the story, AM 950, we want to bring out Native issues, local and nationally, and what's going on locally and nationally with Native issues. So I'm proud to be here. Again, I've had the opportunity, MN 350 has asked me to be on their board, and now I'm on their board. One of the things that's exciting about tonight and what we do on our radio show also is that I really don't know much. But what I do is I bring people that do know. And so it's not my opinion, it's the facts, and they come in with their truth and tell us what these issues are. And again, I could sit here and be angry at certain politicians and what they're doing, but that's just anger. What I'm bringing in is people that have been affected, whether it's pipelines, whether it's poor schooling, whether it's the genocide that happened and that it's still happening to our Native women. But that's another story that we can go into. But what I'm really excited about is to have all these great water protectors and people with information that are well beyond what I know. And I'm also really excited to have Redbone here, who's going to be singing and telling us the traditions of what goes with the drum and the songs and what they mean. And I'd really love to just give it over to them right now. Thank you.
Anin Buju. My name's Mizaway Dijarle. I'm Red Lake Ojibwe. I grew up here in the metro area most of my life. And then we got my friend here, my bro Donald Blackhawk. He's Ho-Chunk, also from here in Minneapolis, and Isaiah Olson, who is Fond du Lac and Red Lake, and he's also here from Minneapolis. And we're the Redbone, and we're here from the Twin Cities in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And we've been singing here in the Twin Cities since we were all little guys growing up. Not always singing at the same drum group, but always singing together. We always drum hopped with each other. Redbone was started about 2 years ago. It was actually started in Fond du Lac at the Black Bear Casino powwow by all of us right here. And we've been traveling ever since. We've been traveling all over the United States to different tribal celebrations all over, traveling to different contest powwows and sharing our music to all the different tribal peoples out there. Today we brought our hand drums just because there's 3 of us and it seemed like a better fit. The hand drums, the song that we sang was a Cree song. It's a round dance song. And those are popular up north in Canada from the Crees, and they have those round dances that go on during the winter time. And so that's why we brought the hand drums, because it's a little bit easier for us. And the hand drums were around before the big drum, if you guys ever seen the bigger drums. And the bigger drums, it's a round piece of wood that's hollow, and it has a hide on both sides of it that's tied down all around it, really tight, and it makes a real loud boom noise. We also, that's the drum we travel with. Those drums are they're real sacred to us. We oftentimes you refer to us, we'll call our drums grandpas. And because the way we look at it is that our drums have spirits in them. So in our language, when we talk about the drum, we talk about the drum because the drum's alive. So when we talk about the drum, we say he, and we say our vowels, we say he or she. And that's the way we talk about the drum as a person. And we bring the drum with us all over. And the another thing that's taught to us is that the drum was never belongs to us. We just take care of them. The drum belongs to the people, so anytime we're asked to sing, we always come out and sing, especially around here and where we're from in Minneapolis. We sing at all kinds of different events and all kinds of different places. We're also, we sing at a lot of different funerals and wakes in the community. A lot of times we're called upon for that and in the different celebrations that we have here in Minneapolis during the winter time. And then during the summertime, we're on the trail, and that's when we're traveling all over every weekend. Everyone who sits at our drum and travels with us, we all look at each other as brothers. So these are my brothers here, and all the rest of the guys who sing with us that are not here with us today, they're all of our brothers too. And we have people that sing with us that are from all over, not just Minneapolis. We also have people that are from down in New Mexico, and we also have some singers from North Dakota and stuff like that. And we also have singers that sometimes come and sing with us from the places we go. And so we have a lot of people that come and sing with our drum. And the drum, we believe that drum brings all those people to him. And so those are all of our brothers that come to us. And we take care of that drum, and the drum is always looked at first. And we never leave that drum alone. And being a singer, it's like they have all these teachings that come with it, and it teaches us all these different values and respects and stuff like that. And that's the thing about our people, that's the way we worked, is everything had a purpose, and everything that everybody did, no matter if they were singers or if they were hunters or if they were beaters, they all had teachings that went with it, and all those teachings is what taught them all the values and stuff like that. So, but with that, I think we're going to sing one more song for you, and then you guys are going to continue on with your program.
Thank you so much, Redbone. I was so excited to have Redbone up here. I forgot to mention what the rest of the program was going to be about. So we're going to have, the first speaker is going to be Alan Anderson on climate change and pipelines. And then Melissa Lorenz is an expert on laws and treaty rights. And then we'll have another music break. And Aaron Wise on what happened at Standing Rock to create a movement. It's awesome to see everybody here. One of the things that I want to do quickly here, and then we're going to have Kathy too, who is a volunteer for MN 350, and she's going to talk about Line 3. And what am I going to do here is I'm going to give Alan his quick bio here and introduce him so we stay as close as we can on the clock. Alan Anderson from Northfield, Minnesota, graduated from Oregon State University with a BS degree in wildlife science in 1972. He co-owned a small business in St. Cloud for 5 years and served in the Army National Guard. Joined the scouting profession in 1978. Retired in 2012 after 34 years of an executive service with the Boy Scouts. Since retiring, Alan has studied the issue of climate change and its solutions, and dedicates his time to giving programs about rising CO2, the science of climate change, and solutions. He is also an active volunteer member of the Citizens Climate Lobby and has lobbied in Washington, D.C., and he and his wife, Debbie, have been married for 43 years, have 2 grown kids, and 3 little granddaughters who focus his concern about the health of the planet and where we will leave it to them. Please welcome Alan Anderson.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege to be here. And if I can turn your attention to one of the screens, whichever is easiest for you to watch, we'll see if all of our technology cooperates. I was asked to speak a little bit about climate change. Kind of a Cliff Notes presentation on that, and then impacts of pipelines, and then some possible solutions. So we'll go quickly through, and if you have questions, please do write them down for the panel portion. So here we go. Since about 1910, the low point on the blue part of the graph here, you can see that the temperature trend, while never straight up in a straight line, has been very significantly up. And since about 1975, it's been dramatically rising. And if you think, just imagine just extending that line upward, doesn't even have to go any faster than it's currently going. We've already increased global average temperatures by about 1 degree centigrade, and scientists are saying that we should stay below, increasing at 1.5, and definitely keep it below 2, and we're already at 1. So our challenge is great. The rising curve is fast. 2014 was the hottest year. 2015 was hotter still by far. And 2016, which doesn't appear on this graph, was even hotter. It's a trend line that we cannot stay on. So there's always a lot of debate about the scientific consensus, but in fact, in many, many different studies now, the overwhelming majority, usually something over 95% of working climate scientists, agree that the planet's warming rapidly. It's warming because of rising CO2 and greenhouse gases. That's caused mainly by burning fossil fuels. And the more CO2 we put up, the warmer it's going to get. Just like 2 + 2 is 4, the more we put up, the warmer it will continue to get. And really the only solution to prevent even more warming and even worse consequences is to decrease atmospheric CO2, and that action is really urgently needed. And so when you think about it, you might have seen a senator throw a snowball in the Senate chamber to demonstrate that there wasn't climate change. But actually, we still will have winters, and we'll still have snow, but we're permanently shifting the climate from the nice climate we have known for almost 10 millennia to a new permanently warmer climate. And if we don't quit burning CO2, it will just keep shifting farther in the direction of even hotter. So the scientists are telling that really everything is at risk from climate change. And it's not something that's going to happen in the distant future. It's happening right now. Torrential rains right here in Minnesota in the last 5 years, we've had 3 1,000-year floods. And there's more on the way. In other parts of the country, we're having record droughts. In Miami and Norfolk, Virginia, we're having what's called blue sky flooding, when the sun and the moon line up and we have a king tide, and seawater bubbles up the storm sewers even on a windless, sunny day and floods the streets and some neighborhoods now, and it's beginning to impact property values. And that's just going to continue to rise. There's more frequent and hotter heat waves, literally killing people. Rising insurance rates. Again, if you own a home in Minnesota, you've seen your insurance rates go up substantially. I had, along with half of my neighbors, our houses, our roofs and our houses destroyed by golf ball size hail. And there's just more of that on the way with more erratic weather. And in other parts of the world, millions of climate refugees already, and people in low-lying Pacific islands voting as small countries, like the country of Kiribati, to abandon their ancestral home and move to New Zealand or some other place that will have them, because their homeland that they've lived on for tens of generations is being swamped by rising seas. And I mentioned Miami Beach, and this is a picture of blue sky flooding on a nice, otherwise nice day, and it's only going to get worse. And as I mentioned, property values are beginning to be impacted there. And this is a small print to read, but there's a lot. It's really becoming a more bipartisan issue, although it's been politicized. It's a scientific issue, and we should listen to the scientists and move ahead based on them. And if you skim those, probably some of the most gripping ones, the recent American Petroleum Institute report says, few things threaten America's future prosperity more than climate change. And oil companies calling for a carbon tax on their product. Why would they do that? Because they've accepted the science and they've got grandkids too. So pipelines. This is a pipeline that burst and was dug up and is being replaced. But a lot of these pipelines are 40 and 50 years old. And unless we start replacing them before they burst, we're just going to have a rising frequency of them blowing up. And when they do, it's always ugly. Here are just some pictures of pipelines flooding farmers' fields on rivers and then catching fire and flowing through a residential neighborhood. And I don't know if you can see the sheen in the diagram, but that entire surface of that river, the Kalamazoo River, is oil. And wetlands being really almost irreparably damaged. And of course, any wildlife that gets messed up with the oil is certainly in serious trouble. This is a picture of the black dots are pictures of pipeline breaks and spills. The blue dots are pictures of natural gas leaks. And there's been over 500 fatalities and over $6 billion worth of property damage just in the last 30 years. We have to find a better way, and there are better ways. So pipeline spills in Minnesota are ugly as ever. And these are just the Enbridge Oil Company crude spills in Minnesota. Some as much as 500,000 gallons of crude. And so as bad as those spills are to the local property and to any property owners that are involved, on a bigger scale, burning fossil fuels is taking us into a completely unsustainable and uncharted territory. At the bottom of this graph, you see a red line, which is carbon dioxide levels. The blue line is temperature levels. And for the last actually 800,000 years and perhaps longer, CO2 never got above 280 parts per million. Today it's at 400 parts per million. And at our current rate, if we don't change our ways, we'll be somewhere between 800 and 1,200 parts per million. And you can see how unbelievably out of the natural cycle that is. A global, uncontrolled, irreversible experiment on our kids' planet. So simply put, if we wish to have a sustainable life for our kids and grandkids, we've got to keep fossil fuel in the ground. So we don't need pipelines. If we achieve keeping them in the ground, pipelines and tankers will be obsolete. And we must challenge the continued use of fossil fuels everywhere we can, champion the fastest possible transition to renewables. There are solutions: stop burning coal, transition oil and gas as fast as we can, improve agriculture, and use every other technological thing that we possibly can. Wind and solar, which is growing like gangbusters. And by the way, enough solar falls on North America just in a tiny portion of the panhandle to power the entire country if we got serious about doing solar. And obviously we wouldn't put it there, we'd disperse it across the country, but there's enough free energy coming in every day for all the power we need. There's nuclear, a lot of concerns in this country, but France gets 80% of all their electricity from nuclear with no accidents. Revenue neutral carbon fee and dividend is something that CCL and other groups are working on. Tesla's building electric cars and mega batteries to store the electricity from solar and wind. And a lot of car companies now are investing hundreds of millions of dollars in perfecting the hydrogen fuel cell car. And imagine the day when rooftop solar shingles collect electricity, charge your car, and batteries store the excess for use in the evening. And all of that technology is already here. And this is a Tesla. There's a white Tesla battery hanging on the wall. And Elon Musk is starting his solar collector shingle factory. So all those things are already here. But one of the best solutions, because if all the people who do understand the issue and really go after it did something, that's not good enough. We need systemic solutions. Carbon fee and dividend is one of the best. And the way that works is oil, gas, and coal, as they come out of the ground, are taxed with a fee, and 100% of that money is refunded to American households. And because of that tax, the price of a lot of things go up. But the fact that the rebate has gone back to families keeps pretty much the lower 60 to 70% of the population better off. And then non-fossil fuel renewables become cheaper and more competitive. And so the forces of the market take over and help us transition quickly. And here down in the corner, the CEO of Shell Oil Company said this year, carbon pricing encourages the fastest and most efficient way to reduce CO2 emissions. And here are some of the benefits of carbon fee and dividend. Net 2 million more jobs, reduces CO2 emissions faster than any other system that has been come up with. The dividend increases household family incomes, saves lives, something like 225,000 American lives just in the first 20 years, just by improving air quality, and a net $1.3 trillion more in GDP than if we did not have a carbon fee and dividend. And at the bottom, there's a new GOP Climate Leadership Council headed by George Shultz, James Baker, and Hank Paulson, and they agree that this is the way forward. So what can we do? There's a lot of ways to make a difference. I hope that you'll stop by the CCL booth on the way out and you can get a handout that lists all these things and much more as things to do on how you can make a difference personally. We are going to leave a legacy to our children, and the question is, what kind of legacy will it be? Will we listen to the people who say that everything is fine, no need to worry? Or will we listen to the climate scientists who are telling us we need to urgently reduce CO2 emissions if we care about future generations? Will we be good stewards of the earth or despoil it? And these are my 3 little granddaughters, and I envision them asking me, "Are you and the other grown-ups taking care of our little blue planet, Grandpa?" We need to do a lot better than we're doing, and I hope you will all significantly and specifically join the cause to make a difference. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Alan. Now, for just a quick nonpartisan blurb for me again. I wouldn't be here, wouldn't have a radio show if they would have put the oil line through Bismarck like they originally were going to. But instead, they wanted to put it close to Indian land and on treaty land. So I'm, again, really happy to see your information and the information that's going to come up. Our next presenter is Melissa Lorenz. Melissa is an attorney at Hogan Adams PLLC, an Indian law firm in St. Paul. Her practice has included treaty rights, litigation, environmental law, and Indian gaming and finance. She has also published an article about the Army Corps of Engineers' compliance with the National Historic Preservation Act, which is one of the issues in the Standing Rock case. Please welcome Melissa Lorenz.
All right, thank you, Robert. So as Alan discussed, there are some really severe environmental issues that are caused by oil pipelines. But all of those issues are amplified when those environmental impacts interplay with treaty rights. And when we talk about treaty rights, just like when we talk about anything in the law, we need to kind of go back to the beginning and think about the foundational principles that underlie federal Indian law. I just threw up this map to show kind of some version of what this continent looked like before Europeans arrived. And Indian nations existed here and continue to exist here. They had their own territory, they had their own laws and political systems, although they weren't always recognized. And even the earliest United States Supreme Court case law recognized that tribes were sovereign nations. They were distinct in some ways, according to the Supreme Court, from other nations, but nonetheless, they had inherent rights and continue to have inherent rights. These rights were not given to them by the United States. Unlike kind of the way some people will talk about treaty rights. I read an article the other day where someone was talking about how land was given to Standing Rock by a treaty, and that's not how it works. So treaty rights are reserved rights. You don't give something by a treaty, you give something away. And anything that tribes don't give away in the treaty that they had at the time of the treaty making, any rights to land and resources that they possessed, they still retain, even if the treaty doesn't necessarily say so. So you can't just read a treaty and know what rights the tribe has under the treaty. Sometimes treaties do specifically talk about certain rights to hunt and fish, and that language can be really helpful and powerful, but the Supreme Court has recognized for a long time that these rights are inherent rights. They're not rights that were given to tribes on paper. And kind of along with that is the Winters Doctrine, which is that tribes, when they retain reservations, they also reserved all the water that they needed to continue their way of life or to fulfill the purpose of the treaty. So a treaty doesn't necessarily talk about water rights, but if a tribe has a treaty and has reservation land, there are water rights that come along with that. And those water rights will actually trump water rights by users that come later, like in the western United States, you gain water rights by using the water. Tribes don't have to do that because they have their rights reserved by treaty. And Indian law scholars also say that there's an implied right to habitat protection in treaties. And when you think about it, it makes sense because why would a tribe negotiate so hard to retain certain rights to something that's very important to them, like wild rice or fish, if that resource was going to be gone in a few hundred years? That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't fulfill the purpose of the treaty. It's kind of complicated because nobody really thought that would happen back then. Nobody thought that we would damage the environment as much as we have. But there is some case law that's starting to indicate that tribes may have a right to habitat protection under some circumstances, and that's still very much being fleshed out in the courts. But this case, United States v. Washington, came out in the Ninth Circuit last year, and that was kind of a landmark case on the implied treaty right to habitat protection. It was a very unique fact pattern because it involved these barrier culverts that were blocking the migration of salmon, and it had been recognized in the 1970s by the courts that the tribes of the Pacific Northwest had treaty rights to those salmon. So by blocking the salmon from migrating and spawning, the tribes were able to show that there was a really direct impact on their treaty right and a very concrete, tangible thing that could be done to interfere less with that right. And so if tribes have these really strong treaty rights, you might wonder why they're not asserted more often and why they're not protected more often. It's because it's really hard to get them recognized and enforced. And part of that is because of the canons of treaty construction. Treaties with Indian tribes are interpreted differently than treaties with other nations because of the unique history between tribes in the United States, the history of colonization. The first is that Indian treaties are interpreted as the Indians would have understood them at the time that the treaties were made. And that's because treaties were not negotiated treaties were negotiated in English, not in native languages, and they were written in English. And a lot of the native negotiators maybe didn't speak English, or English certainly wasn't their first language, and they were relying on translators that were provided by the United States. So there was an inherent power imbalance there, and also it's entirely possible that things are mistranslated because there can be a big difference between the way you express concepts in native languages and in English that could have easily just gotten lost in translation. The other two principles are that if you have two possible interpretations of a treaty, you basically construe it in favor of the Indians. And that's kind of for similar reasons. Tribes were not represented by lawyers when they were negotiating. The United States was sort of assuming a dual role of representing the tribes and representing the United States itself. And usually in contract law, that when you have that kind of an imbalanced relationship and a very coercive relationship, the contract would be invalid. But the Supreme Court has instead of taking kind of a contract law approach, the Supreme Court has said, okay, we're just going to pretend that the United States was always negotiating in good faith. And if there's ever a question about the United States' intentions, we're going to assume that they were good intentions. So that's how those canons of construction came to be. And I think Aaron's going to talk more about the specific pipelines, and Kathy too, but I just wanted to show these treaty areas. This is the Dakota Access Pipeline in red on that map, and the kind of light gray is the 1851 treaty territory, and you can see the reservations there also. So something people say when they talk about Standing Rock is, well, it doesn't go through the reservation. But whether or not it goes directly through the reservation, it has a big impact on the reservation, and it also impacts other treaty resources. That's the 1851. This is the 1868 treaty area. And both of those treaties expressly reserve the privilege of hunting, fishing, or passing over any tracts of country ceded to the United States. So you do have some express language there. Additionally, there's all this water appurtenant to the reservations, and Standing Rock and Cheyenne River likely retain implied water rights there, and the reservations also likely extend into the water. So part of those waters are actually part of the reservation. But the reason that we have separate reservations here now, instead of just one Great Sioux Reservation that was reserved by the 1868 treaty, is because Congress took those lands. So this area continues to be disputed. For the reasons we talk about, it's not easy to get a court to enforce those treaties, because I guess the part that I didn't mention when I was talking about the canons of treaty construction, or you need historical and linguistic experts to establish what Indians understood at the time of the treaty. You need expert testimony on all of that stuff, and there's a lot of historical research that goes into it. So it's not a simple thing to bring a treaty rights claim in court. And in relationship to Dakota Access, also, the Solicitor of the Interior, which is sort of the representative of the federal government that advocates for tribes, has said that because of the tribe's treaty rights, both Standing Rock and Cheyenne River's treaty rights in that area, the Corps is supposed to consider the impacts of its permitting decisions on their reserved rights, hunting, fishing, and water. The United States, since we pretend that the United States negotiated in tribes' best interest, we also, there's a similar rule of statutory construction that when the United States complies with statutes or enacts statutes, we pretend or assume that the United States is acting in tribes' best interest also. So when we're dealing with environmental statutes like the National Environmental Policy Act, we say that the Corps of Engineers has a trust responsibility to tribes to act in their best interest and to consider the impacts on their reserved rights. And the Line 3 pipeline also goes through treaty areas. Maybe I should provide a little background because I'm not sure how well known Line 3 is, but Line 3 is a tar sands pipeline that runs through Minnesota. And in the black on that map, you can see where the pipeline is right now. It goes through a lot of treaty territory and also a couple of reservations, Fond du Lac and Leech Lake. And I think it also, this map shows the oil spills that have happened along the way, I believe. And the red line is where Enbridge is trying to reroute Line 3. So they're trying to basically expand and reroute that oil pipeline through Minnesota. And they want to leave the existing pipeline in the ground. So it's interesting to me that this time they're not going through the reservations, but they're still going through a significant amount of treaty territory. The 1837 treaty and the 1854 treaty both specifically talk about hunting and fishing rights. And so the 1837 is kind of the lower portion there. That was the Mille Lacs case that went to the United States Supreme Court. So it's been definitively established that the Ojibwe bands retain treaty rights there. The 1854 treaty was litigated in a federal district court. So it's also been established that there are treaty rights in that area. 1855 treaty has not been litigated, and that one's a little bit less obvious, I guess, or more challenging for the tribes because there's not express language about hunting or fishing rights. But that certainly doesn't mean that those rights don't exist in the 1855 treaty territory. But it means that we'll have to do a little more work to establish that. Oh, and yeah, so I was just going to mention too, another part of treaty rights litigation is you kind of need the right fact pattern to get the court to address the question and get the court to pay attention to the question. And so that's why you see things like fish-ins happening. I don't know if you've heard about that in the news, where tribal members go out and they harvest with fishing nets, which violates Minnesota state laws because they're trying to get a citation, because they're trying to get it in court so that the issue can be litigated of whether they retain a treaty right. And that gets to be really contentious between native harvesters and non-native harvesters, I think, because that kind of historical context sort of gets lost somewhere when we're talking about Indian treaty rights. So I guess that's all I've got. Give it to Aaron.
Thank you so much, Melissa. As we're waiting for Redbone to come back, oh, they're moving. They're heading towards here. One of the things I would like to mention too about Line 3 is that not only do they want to reroute it, they want to keep the old pipeline still in the ground, the leaky old 50-year-old pipeline. One thing we do know about pipelines is they do leak, eventually leak. And so my name is Wakanja Hade, and that's my native name, which is my name, and that means distant thunder. And I'm a proud, also a proud member of Ho-Chunk Nation. You know, I can't wait until Aaron comes up. Aaron, I wrote your own bio there. So we didn't get one, so I wrote one out for you. Wait until you hear it. I'm making more notes too. I'm thinking, oh yeah, I saw Aaron at the Capitol. I have to write it. Yeah. So as soon as we get the other member of Redbone here, we'd like a little more singing. That sound great. Thank you so much again for coming.
Hey,
introduce Aaron Wise. Aaron Wise, it says here, happened to be at Standing Rock to create a movement. Many indigenous people around the world came peacefully, generally, and purposefully. She marched on DC, on pipelines, and the new focus is on Line 3. One of the things I'd like to say too is that you work for Honor the Earth now, and you were the media liaison for the International Indigenous Youth Council and was the media coordinator at Sacred Stone. When I first came across Melissa, that was after 146 water protectors that were prayerfully praying and were arrested. And I remember you were worried about your youth that you were in charge of and where they were going to be sent, and it was a very stressful time. Aaron is a true water warrior. When I think of Standing Rock, Aaron's one of the people I do think of. Last time I saw Aaron, we were at the state capitol, and she might talk a little bit about this, but she was escorted out of there, which is a good thing. I'd really like to introduce Aaron Wise up here. Come on up here.
Hello, everyone. Danjo Sheikh Wastiwe Shizi. My name is Aaron Wise. I'm from the Hickory Apache Nation in Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico. I was raised here in Minneapolis as a youth and eventually am now returning after fighting in Standing Rock. If you don't mind, I'm going to turn on my timer because I like to talk. And I don't want anybody to have to sit here and listen to me getting too riled up. Also want to say thank you to the young men singing. I was mentored here in Minneapolis by a man who recently passed away. His name was Johnny Smith, and he was one of the most incredible men I've ever met in my life, and he was from the Red Lake Nation, Miigwech. And also thank you to the people of this land. This is so-called Bloomington, so-called Minnesota, and it actually belonged to the Anishinaabe people, so Miigwech. I guess a few things stood out to me while I was listening to these talks. It's really hard for me to come into spaces like this and hear people say that the United States probably didn't know what they were doing or that they were acting in the best interest of people that they were ultimately conquering. There was a genocide that was committed on United States American soil. My people are the remnants of what is left. We are less than 1% of the population now, so I feel it's safe to say that the United States was never trying. They knew what they were doing. Hitler came here, so did South Africa, to figure out how to set up their reservations because they liked the United States model so much. With that, I also, I guess a lot of people I'm sure want to know about Standing Rock. Want to make it abundantly clear that Standing Rock, while it was a huge catalyst for movements for Indigenous lives, treaty rights, land rights, cultural cornerstones, that is not the only fight. I do not want to focus all of our attention on Standing Rock while we are caught up in litigation with what's happening in Standing Rock, while we are currently having over 800 water protectors go through a very biased court system in North Dakota right now, where they are actively being attacked, outside of the courtrooms, while they are actively being attacked within the courtrooms by judges, by jury members, by folks in the audience. I think it's safe to say that we can direct a lot of our prayers and energy to Standing Rock, but we also need to acknowledge what is happening in Minnesota and around the country. There are many fights right now. As my former speakers have said, we are fighting Enbridge Line 3. As was stated earlier, Enbridge has this Line 3 that currently exists that does go through reservation lands. They do not plan to take this pipeline out of the earth, right? They're going to leave it there. They've known that it has been out of commission, that it hasn't been running in the way it should for about 40 years now. They've known that it's been casually leaking, that it's what they call them burps or gas or like farts, right? Pipeline farts. It's really cute and funny until you realize that what they're doing is they're emitting these gases that are impacting the lives of Minnesotans. I'm looking around the audience here, and I think I'm one of maybe 4 or 5 people that's under the age of 40. So one of the things that I think and would like to impress upon you is that I'm a youth worker, right? I know that the stuff we talk about is boring. The kids don't want to hear it. They don't want to listen. We don't know if they're really going to be able to sit still. But also, one of the big things that I learned in Standing Rock is that if there are kids that are around that are given the opportunity to do something great, they do. I don't know if many of you know, but the Standing Rock No Dapple movement was actually started by the youth. Some of those youth were part of the One Mind Youth Movement, and they ran actually several different runs, long-distance runs, before ultimately running all the way from North Dakota to Washington, D.C., with a petition saying, hey, President Obama, we really, really don't want this pipeline in our territories because we want to see a future for ourselves and for our children. Ultimately, President Obama did not step in. We know that I can't even say that. Trump overturned those statements and those executive actions, right? Because he has personal investments in these pipelines, and he said, "No, we're going to let it go through. We care about the kids, not enough to let them live, but enough that they're going to exist for right now and fill my pocket. So let's go for it." And we had these youth, right? They were given the opportunity. They were told, "Hey, we're behind you," and so they kept doing these incredible things. A lot of people look at Standing Rock and they say, oh my gosh, look at how violent they were. Look at how much they didn't listen to the law. If they had just done things right ahead of time, then we wouldn't be in this situation. And why are they here? Well, they're here because they've been dealing with this for 525 plus years and they're a little tired of it. I also want to talk a little bit about not just the youth, but about Honor the Earth and what it is we're about. A lot of people see us fighting these pipelines and they're like, okay, honor the earth, I'm putting them in my pipeline box and I'm going to shut that file and store it for later. We're also really invested in tribal sovereignty, food sovereignty, tribal rights, and cultural cornerstones, as has been mentioned, wild rice, fishing, and our sugar bushes, right? I went a couple weeks ago with some family in Wisconsin. We went out to the sugar bush. The young boys brought their hand drums. They realized that I have somewhat of a network on social media, and they were like, if she posts this video, we're gonna be famous. And 45,000 views later, everywhere I went, there was a hand drum following me, and hoping that I would take my phone out again. They're great kids, right? But again, they're kids that are being made aware of what is important to them as Indigenous young men, as Indigenous youth, and they're saying, hey, we're actually kind of cool, right? I don't have to turn on the TV and look at myself and see Johnny Depp wearing a headdress with a bird glued on it, talking like this, right? I can turn on a TV and I can see someone like Erin, who's standing in front of the White House, being very articulate, holding her dignified rage, and saying, hey, you guys can do whatever you want to because I'm just a girl from the res, just like you, doing something greater than myself, right? They're inspired. And I think that a charge to all of you who appear to be parents, grandparents that are in the room, is that next time, even if it's boring, bring your kids. Because ultimately, most of you will die before them, fact of the matter, and those kids need to know what it is that's going to impact the rest of their lives. Right now, we are not leaving them an opportunity for a very long life. And, as you saw, there were pictures of the Kalamazoo River spill. I met a man 2 weeks ago. I was speaking in Michigan at Albion College to some youth there. And this man told me that he had grown up alongside the Kalamazoo River, right? He walked outside every day into it. It was in his backyard. He loved that river in the same way that I'm sure I love the Mississippi. It was a river that I grew up on. I learned how to fish. I learned how to swim, canoe, everything. Here in Minneapolis. It was my favorite place. And this man told me that after the Kalamazoo River spill, that they came in and they cleaned it up. And, the man said, come look at this river. We've cleaned it, right? He stepped in, 10 inches is how deep it used to be, and he sunk in up to his waist. That was how much oil had saturated in the ground. They pulled him out, and he said that his legs and his waist down were burning for 3 days, and he was throwing up the entire time. He was told later that he has a disease that's only supposed to affect 0.02% of the population, and he knows 9 people in his community there in Kalamazoo that are impacted that have this same disease. It's a flesh-eating disease. It eats underneath the skin, and he went from being a man who could run 7 miles a day to a man that is now crippled and 200 pounds overweight. They told everyone in Kalamazoo, here, we brought you these water filters. If you just sign here for us, That would be great. And so these people, desperate to do anything, right, to save their children, they sign these waivers, not thinking, find out later that Enbridge had actually taken people and sent them out and said, give them water filters, have them sign these documents. They're probably not going to read them. And they signed away their rights to fight Enbridge. This is a company right now that has Minnesota in its back pocket. I don't know if you are all familiar with the Jobs and Energy Omnibus Bill that was actually just passed through Minnesota state legislation. We're currently waiting on Governor Dayton to veto it. I was promised by his office a couple of weeks ago when I was at the state capitol that they were planning to veto. I hope that is still the case. It contains these fast-track pipeline bills that are actually going to make it so that if pushed through, all the way through, Enbridge will be able to start construction on Line 3, this new Line 3, not the one that they're replacing, on July 1st, 2017. So we have about 2.5 months to get our ducks in a row, right? And also there's these other 2 outrageous clauses that would exempt all future and oil gas lines from the certificate of need process. Basically making it so these pipeline companies won't even have to do like the most necessary part of their environmental impact statements. They'll just get to come in and say, hey, we're going to build this thing and it's going to be great, and everyone's so overwhelmed by the big J word, right? Not Jesus, although he is risen, I'm told. It's jobs, right? Jobs in the United States. Everyone's looking for them. Well, the thing about pipeline jobs is that most of them are construction jobs. They're blue-collar work. And only about 30 of them, on average, are left once the big mass production is finished. Right? We have more jobs in cleaning up these abandoned pipelines than we do in actually creating long-term positions for Minnesotans. A lot of Minnesotans are looking at this pipeline and they're saying, well, I like oil, right? I like my truck, I like my car, me too. I know that tomorrow isn't going to end the fossil fuels industry, right? If I got everyone on my page, it wouldn't stop. We wouldn't know how to transition into the next phase. What I'm saying is that we need to start making a path to get there. As was mentioned by Alan, you know, there are several ways we can do it, but it doesn't make the most money immediately, so people are not looking at that. They're not looking at the fact that pipelines and their companies and that oil is actually upside down in debt, and that they are borrowing money to give back to their investors to say, hey, we're going to do it. As long as we get this completed, then we'll just get you everything back. It's almost akin to being told that we're going to build this wall that's going to be paid for by somebody else eventually. And we'll get there, right? I'm not a big fan of credit cards. I'm not a big fan of owing people money that I do not have, and so I'm not entirely sure about how I feel about these pipelines and how I feel about oil and how I feel about these walls that are going to be built without any capital that is currently invested. Another thing that I wanted to talk to you all about is how you can help here in the state of Minnesota, right? One of the things that Robert mentioned is that I got escorted out of the state capitol. I have a little bit of a problem when the youth are involved. In particular, I was a mom for the International Indigenous Youth Council. In Standing Rock, it was my job to make sure that 30 kids came home at the end of every day, right? They were kids in range from 3 years old to 29. They were youth that were out there and they were fighting for their lives. And that was what they would say. And they'd tell us, oh, no, you're using kids as human shields. No, these kids know what's going on and they want to be a part of it, and they realize that no one else is doing it, so they're stepping up. That was a big thing for me. And so when I went to the state capitol the other day, right, I was there with some of the youth that I've started working with here in the Twin Cities, and they said, we want to get involved. We want our voices to be heard, and we don't want it just to be any voices. We want it to be Indigenous voices. We want them to know that we exist. We are not caricatures of who we actually are. We're not the Hollywood Indian. We're real. We're right now. We're Anishinaabe. We want to stand up. So I said, all right, let's go. We went and we had a rally. It was really, really good. There was a lot of people there. They were super supportive. We were following every single rule that we needed to follow. We were well within our constitutional rights. And we got up to the chambers. We were watching all of the representatives on the House floor on their cell phones. Right? They're discussing this massive bill, and I see them playing Candy Crush, checking their Facebooks, taking pictures on Instagram, right? There were more than one baby on the floor, right? There were legislators there with their children on the floor, but they were denying climate change. And they were saying, we're here fighting for our children. We're doing this for our children. The good children of America need protection. And they had those kids in their lap, and they were telling everyone else in the room that climate change was not real. The kids sitting next to me, they were like, "Are they serious?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they were like, "Our taxes pay for this?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I didn't know what to do. There's one particular representative, I believe his name is Pat Garofalo. Yeah, I feel like I'm in a room full of my friends now. He was condescending to his Democratic opponent, who was saying that, we needed to stop pandering, right, to these companies, these pipeline companies. We needed to stop pandering to the people that say climate change isn't real. We needed to stop making it easier for them to do their jobs rather than making it easier for us to ensure a future for, all the next generations. And, he was complaining about how some process wasn't followed, and it was a whole lot of semantics that didn't make any sense to anybody else in the room but him. And he kept talking, and, she stood up to say something, and he was like, no, you're getting emotional, right? Because she's a woman, you're getting emotional. And he says these things, right? Because it's common belief. Women are emotional. We emote too much. We have too many opinions. We're only here for one purpose. We're just going to do all of the things that we've always done forever because that's worked. And, he was being really rude. I'm raised by my grandmas. I don't know, my grandmas were really tough. And my grandpa uplifted women, right? He was a veteran. He is like the nicest, kindest, sweetest, most dedicated Christian Trump supporter I've ever met. And it blows my mind, right? Because I am the antithesis of everything that he supports, but I love him. So I understand these septuagenarians, these octogenarians, and I'm trying to make space for them and say, hey, I understand what's going on because y'all have this perspective and this is how it was back then. I'm going to try and, acknowledge that. But he kept condescending to this woman, and these kids were watching it, right? They're watching what their taxes are paying for. They're watching the process. They're watching these legislators on their cell phones. They're watching how their futures are going to be impacted by this omnibus bill. And no one is saying anything to this man who is being so rude. So of course I stand up. And I wait and I wait and I think, man, we had such a good rally. And then somebody down on the floor says, well, there was just really great singing out there. Let's just commend them on how good they are at banging a drum, right? I'm going to bang a drum too next time I go home. Not like it's a sacred thing, not like it's something we've been doing for thousands of years pre-contact because it's a cultural cornerstone of who we are as human beings, but because it sounds great. You can find it on Spotify. So I start yelling and I say, hey, we're up here. We're watching you. We don't appreciate the way this process is being run. We don't appreciate watching you condescend to women. We don't appreciate the fact that you're denying climate change. Kids' lives are at stake, and we need to start doing something about it, right? Minnesotan lives are at stake. It's not just about the economy. It's not just about property value. It's not just about tourism. It's about the fact that they are strategically placing these pipelines because they don't want to have to go through tribal jurisdiction. Newsflash for everybody, this is unceded territory. We did not give it up. It was stolen from us, and we are trying to work in conjunction with everybody else that now has a piece of the pie to say, hey, we want to live too. Please allow us an avenue to do so. Right? Rep. Garofalo, he put his hands behind his head, and he kicked his leg up, right? And he said, keep yelling. So I did. They kicked me... They kicked me out, and I'm almost out of time. I'm really good at this. Okay, they kicked me out, but the point of all of that is that there are ways and there are avenues to do it, right? And the youth are going to see people like me that are standing in the face of adversity, that are saying, hey, United States government, state of Minnesota, the way you've been doing things for the last 200 plus years hasn't been going so well. You haven't been stewards of the land. You haven't taken care of the people that are living on this land, and now we need to stand up and say, hey, no more. We need help of all Minnesotans to do that. Like I said, line 3, it's kind of a cluster cuss of a situation. There are a lot of reasons why it's bad. There are a lot of reasons why people think it's good. Ultimately, they think that they're going to reroute it. Our job as Minnesotans, I truly believe, and our job, as an organizer for Honor the Earth and as an Indigenous woman is to say that we are not going to allow pipelines anymore. Oil is not going to last. It is a finite resource, and no matter how many places we find to extract it, it's going to get more expensive. It's going to be harder to extract, and if you look at the tar sands in Alberta, there is more deforestation in Canada than there is in the Amazon. There are people that are dying. There, hundreds of thousands of people, are at risk. Millions of people are at risk in these communities, and they say, well, we'll put it, by rail or by bus because that's safer. No, okay, then we're going to put it in pipelines because that's safer. Well, ultimately, it doesn't matter how we're transporting this oil. People are dying. If there are lives being lost because of the things that we're doing, then we need to do something else. Line 3 is slated to begin in a year if Governor Dayton vetoes this bill, right? Enbridge says that they'll have a full year. They'll have a year to make Minnesota a pass-through state for oil that we don't even benefit from, that will go through 2/3 of our most shallowest aquifers, that will damage some of the most serene and perfect soil systems that have ever existed. And, it'll make it so that Minnesota won't be the land of 10,000 lakes, right? It'll be the land of lakes and some oil and Enbridge in our back pocket. I just will go on forever and ever, but I think if you have any questions, please go to stopline3.org and feel free to ask me at the panel or afterwards. Thank you.
And just a reminder too, if you have more questions, please write them down because we'll have the Q&A session. One of the things that he also said was, it was very nice that you serenaded me with the drums in a very sarcastic voice. And, thank you for what you did. Our next panel member, I just have to say a quick thing, is that the first time I went to Standing Rock, Kathy was on that trip too. And as we were less than a mile away, we were probably closer to half a mile away. We were driving in 2 buses, and we were bringing youth up to help the youth of Standing Rock and give them a break in the kitchens. And we had 145 people there. And as we were getting closer to Standing Rock, an eagle flew right at our bus and went up and over, and the whole bus went, oh, all at once. So that was my relatives, our relatives, saying hello, and we're doing a good thing. It was one of the most amazing trips I've ever been on. Kathy Hollander is a full-time volunteer for MN 350 since 2013. MN 350 is a grassroots group raising awareness of climate change in Minnesota. Her specialty is extreme oil extraction, transportation across Minnesota, especially tar sands oil from Canada. She is also a volunteer citizen activist at the state legislature. Her corporate work was as a computer system analyst, software, and support manager with Spear, Univac, and Cray. She also remodels and repairs several homes. All right, Kathy, come on up here, please, and everyone welcome.
Aaron, you're a really hard act to follow. That was amazing. Can I cede my time to you so you can spend more 15 minutes? I was asked to speak about civic engagement, and after what Aaron spoke, I feel like what we're doing is tame by comparison. We're trying, Aaron, to do everything we can. At Minnesota 350, we have multiple teams, and one is pipeline resistance, one is corporate accountability. We also have policy action. We work at this legislature. We have education, communications, and outreach, and we have an art team. And why do I have a 3-legged stool up there? That's because MN 350 was founded on the 3-legged stool concept. One leg of that stool would be resistance to fossil fuels. Another leg would be looking forward to the future, working for renewable energy, for example, and a future that we can see where our kids would have a place to breathe air and live and grow food without worrying about the climate being strange. And then the third leg of the stool would be changing hearts and minds. And I think this panel tonight did all of those things wonderfully, and I applaud each speaker. What do we do at MN 350? And by the way, we are a state chapter of a worldwide organization, and 350 stands for 350 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We are a state chapter, Minnesota chapter of this international organization. We are one of the most active. We hold a lot of rallies. We bring out hundreds of people, and Standing Rock was such an amazing event, and so many people went. that we could call a rally on 2 or 3 days' notice and we'd see 500 people showing up. There is that much awareness of what Standing Rock brought to the world, how it identified that our world is a perilous resource. We're at a moment in time where things are changing rapidly and water is at risk and we need water to live. Oil and water are at risk, as well as indigenous rights. We hold many, many rallies. As you can see, we had 5,000 people in St. Paul 2 years ago marching through downtown St. Paul. We've been to New York City with the People's Climate March. We have another People's Climate March coming up this, April 29th it is, same as here, 2017. We're running 8 buses out to Washington, D.C. to that climate march. There's also a local event, but if you can go, please get on one of our buses and get out to DC and make your voice heard. We've held candlelight vigils as well as activities during the day. We've worked against Keystone XL. We've done everything we can. We have an awesome artwork team. We've marched in the May Day parade, for example. We have art teams that help us at every single rally, help again change hearts and minds by using art as a way to reach people and a way to make our rallies really noticeable and to get press, which is what we need to raise the urgency of climate change and how important these actions are. We hold many educational events trying to bring everyday Minnesotans to this event, to this action, to realize the urgency of climate change and the fact that if we continue to rely upon fossil fuels, as Aaron so eloquently pointed out, we are in a heap of trouble. Also did Alan. The time is to start to think about moving off of fossil fuels. We run bus trips not because we enjoy spending fossil fuels doing so, but because we need to bring people to where it can be noticed, where it makes a difference. We show up at hearings in massive numbers. We're out in New York or in DC trying to tell our current president that climate change is important. People care about it, and we show up in huge numbers to say so with our bodies. This is an example of a rally in Nebraska, the only public hearing on the Keystone XL at that time, and we were there. This is a rally at Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I think Al showed a slide of a burst pipeline. We were there. We experienced it firsthand. We could see that river. We put our hands into it. We had a water ceremony. We also have this corporate accountability team where we're identifying banks that continue to invest in the fossil fuel industry while they have corporate accountability statements that say they care about the earth and they care about the environment. And we're saying those two things are no longer compatible. It is time to get off of fossil fuels as quickly as we can. We work on asking people to divest your personal portfolios from fossil fuels and invest in renewable energy. It's now time. We do so many things to raise awareness and to get people involved. I couldn't even think of them all. We do letters to the editor. We do a lot of tabling at events. We do phone calls. We do one-on-ones with the massive numbers of people that are joining our movement. After the election, we had 1,500 people loaded into our database in one fell swoop, the next time we updated our database. We have so many people joining us that right now it's hard to get to know them all. We're doing door knocking and canvassing in outer suburbs, having one-on-one conversations with people who maybe haven't talked about climate change, who maybe aren't thinking about it, to try to raise awareness of it. And to say, we need to work on this, people. We need to raise awareness. We do a lot of public speaking. We also participate in regulatory hearings. Again, this public utilities process, Aaron mentioned it briefly, is what we currently have in the state of Minnesota. It's not a great process, but it's all we have. And it's a public forum where people can speak out about whether or not they want large energy facilities to be implemented or not. They look at such things as need. Is there a need for additional large energy facilities? And if so, what would that facility look like? We've turned out people by the hundreds, again, at some of these hearings. We do political advocacy. We're at the Capitol, too. I was there the day that Aaron was there. We're teaching people who have never called upon their representative or their senator before to actually go to the Capitol, meet your representative, meet your senator. I still see people who are afraid to go to the Capitol, have never contacted their person, in direct one-to-one relationship, and we're breaking that. We're taking youth, we're taking older people for the first time, people my age, everyone to go Go to the Capitol, tell your representatives, stand up for what you believe in. The time is now. We have 5 weeks left in our legislative session. Aaron mentioned there's some very dangerous legislation. Clean water is under attack. Transportation is not being funded properly. Pipelines are going to be implemented supposedly without any regulatory oversight. There are many things happening. Education's another one. There's terrible things going on at the legislature right now. We have 5 weeks left. Call your senator, call your representative, tell them what you care about. She mentioned briefly the problematic legislation. The first is removing pipelines from the certificate of need process. And that is a process where the company has to establish, is there a need for this additional large energy facility? In this case, we're talking about a pipeline. It is a pipeline that would hold more oil than Keystone XL. It is a pipeline that would bring the dangerous kind of oil that is really problematic for water when it spills from the tar sands of Canada. People have talked about that. This particular type of oil is called dilbit. What it consists of is it's a blend of two things. The initial oil, when it comes out from Canada, is so thick, it's like solid as a hockey puck at 55 degrees. It's so thick they can't push it through the pipelines. So they have to mix it with much, much thinner stuff like paint thinner and dilute it a lot to get it to go through the pipelines. That kind of stuff, when it spills, like it did at Kalamazoo, Michigan, the light oil dissipates, goes up into the air, causes breathing problems, and the heavy stuff goes down into the muck in the bottom of the rivers or the wetlands. It mixes with the sediment, and it is literally impossible to get out. Imagine that kind of oil being spilled on Lake Superior. There have been proposals, and we're worried about new proposals, but imagine that kind of a thick oil going to the bottom of the best freshwater lake we have, the coldest lake with a very poor refresh rate at Lake Superior. There is no one who has ever been able to recover oil at those depths, and especially not this thick oil. The second part of the problematic legislation she also mentioned, removing the possibility of certain kind of alternatives from the process and the EIS. In the case of the pipelines going across Minnesota, citizens, even like Friends of Headwaters and other citizens, have proposed alternate pipeline routes at times to say, if we had to have pipelines, new ones go across Minnesota, shouldn't Minnesota have the right to choose the path that they cross our country, our state? Would we want to go through our best wild rice lakes? Would we want to go through our most pristine lakes that we have left? Would we want to go through the most permeable soil in Minnesota? Or could we even think about the possibility of going through a different path? We know in the case of a previous pipeline, which was called Sandpiper, which citizens effectively kicked out of the state of Minnesota. Unfortunately, the company, Marathon Oil, then went to the DAPL pipeline and decided to ship their oil in the DAPL. But all along, the Marathons insisted that their oil had to go to Superior, Wisconsin, across the existing Enbridge corridor, and then on down through Wisconsin to the Chicago area. Citizens asked the question, why couldn't it just go straight from the tar sands or Bakken, wherever it was going, directly to Chicago? Why did it have to go through Superior? Enbridge insisted it had to go through Superior. And we can see the fallacy of that argument because right now that oil is attempting to just go through the DAPL pipeline and completely bypassing Superior. So we're saying, what about looking at alternative routes? And that's the second thing. Right now, Pat Garofalo authored legislation saying that no citizen proposed alternative routes that would have a different entry and exit point for Minnesota would be allowed to be even included in an environmental impact statement. And if they were included, that would point out the fallacy of choosing, your best corridor, how you would not want to do that. The third piece, she also mentioned the green lighting of the pipeline, that it could be built by July 1st. We're very concerned about these three provisions. We're very concerned that one of them or two of them might make it through in the omnibus. These provisions are in the House bill, but they're not yet in the Senate bill, and they're going to go to conference committee. And then you'll have your House bill and your Senate bill merged, and we have to wait and see what comes out. And we're very concerned because there's also job proposals in here. This bill is both energy and a jobs bill, and we're very concerned about what will come out. Call your representative, call your senator. I do have some information in the back about those three provisions. It looks like this in a handout if you want to take it. We also are doing direct action. I think we're being inspired by our Indigenous people, that are partners that we work with as well. But this is a case where I think it was something like 30 of us sat down. Heaven forbid, we sat down in the entrance to the refinery. And you can see the Darth Vader type figures behind us. and we were arrested for merely sitting down in the entry of that refinery. We shut it down for a day. That was BP Whiting Refinery. They converted from like North Dakota sweet crude some time ago to this horrible tar sands oil from Canada. And they bragged to their shareholders about how much cheaper they would be able, how much money they would make because that oil was cheaper to use. We're saying that was unethical. It's not something that our country or our world needed, and I think it was about 35 of us decided no. We took an arrest on it. Ordinary middle-class folks doing that. We have a brave woman in the crowd, Annette Clapstein, who has also taken a direct action up in Clearbrook, Minnesota, and she's facing jail time as a potential possibility. If people are interested in attending a trial where she will try a necessity defense saying climate change is so necessary, we must address it, that ordinary middle-class folks are risking arrest to say that publicly, out loud, because somebody's got to be doing it. There is a kids' climate march coming up if you're looking for activities to do, things to do. I've got a half-pager in the back also talking about the various climate marches. I don't think I got it in front of me right now. This particular Saturday, there's a kids' climate march and there's a scientists' climate march. They're going to meet up in St. Paul. About 1,000 children are showing up to say we want climate change to be addressed. And about, I think it was 10,000 people are joining the scientific march. We need more, what do you call them? Marshals. We need more marshals for the kids' climate march. I'll be one of the people recruiting marshals. If you could be a marshal at this kids' climate march on Saturday, we need you to protect the children as they walk onto Kellogg Boulevard away from the Science Museum. The People's Climate March is coming up in Washington. And that is a week from Saturday. That would be April 29th. Again, Minnesota 350 is running buses out there. Thank you for your time. Join in, jump in. The time is to be now to address climate change. No more sitting back watching television on our sofas and being comfortable. Get out there, get on the streets. Join Erin. Thank you.
And now we're going to have a few questions to our panel. One thing I want to say about MN 350 is I'm a board member, a proud board member right now. And when Standing Rock first happened, Archibald reached out and asked everyone to come down and get involved. And what happened was a bunch of people that I knew, natives, were downtown St. Paul protesting. There was about 20 or 30 of us. Then all of a sudden, this group I saw on Facebook said, "Hey, we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna go to Army Corps of Engineers. We're gonna march there, and then we're gonna go there." And I'm going, "Okay, I'm down. I'll go." I've been singing and pounding the drum, and literally went there, and there was almost 2,000 people there, and that was the power of MN 350. So if you want to get involved, that's a way to get involved immediately, because things are happening all the time. Thank you for bringing your truth. And I have a couple questions here. I'm going to ask Alan here, can we get a copy of your presentation? Where is it, or will you post it online somewhere?
I'd be happy to share that presentation. There's a sign-up sheet out there, and you can just give me your email, and I'll email it to you. It's on, just as you go out the door, the first display on the right is Citizen Climate Lobby. Right at the end of the table is my handout, if you want to grab one of those. And then there's a sign-up sheet there, and I'd be happy to send the presentation.
So I don't know, I think I would like everybody to speak on this question one at a time, is how do we assess the accuracy of the quality of information we hear and see in the news and media regarding our environmental and treaty rights? I would like to start off with that by saying that the press is very skewed. I was at a protest, a march that children put on that was going across the Lake Street Bridge, and they were going to meet the Minneapolis and St. Paul kids, children were going to meet right in the middle. And they were saying that there was hundreds of people there. And then they videotaped they spent a lot of money to have a helicopter, and they videotaped half the Minneapolis side and not both the sides together. And I was just, every time I hear my lion eyes is like, there's thousands of people here, but I hear even in our beloved NPR that there's hundreds. So I feel like we're very askewed with our news, and one of the things about Standing Rock was the live feeds on Facebook that blew everyone's mind. So anybody else have Aaron, do you want to talk about that? 5 minutes.
Yeah,
No, just kidding.
Is it on? Can you
Yeah.
hear me? Okay. 40 minutes later, come up for air. And I would just say that, there are native news outlets. A lot of people don't look at those, right, because they're not corporations, they aren't established, they haven't been around. Journalism is kind of an old boys club, and if you're not a part of the conversation to begin with, then you're not going to be a part of the conversation in future events or with future events. We had KFYR and Bismarck Tribune, my two favorite publications in the entire world, in North Dakota. They would come out, and the sheriff would actually have them stand away from the fray, right? He was keeping them safe, and he would have them stand there, and then he would get on his loudspeaker and go closer, and he would say, please stop shooting your bows and arrows at us. Please stop throwing bombs at us. Please stop, doing all of these things, right, that we were obviously not doing, but he had his news so far away that they couldn't see that he was lying. And nobody believed it. And I mean, especially in situations like this where marginalized communities are going to be directly impacted, they are going to be part of the sacrifice zones, I would say that it would probably be in your best interest that if you have questions about treaty or indigenous environmental rights, that you follow groups like Honor the Earth, who are specifically written for and by indigenous voices, Indigenous Environmental Network, Indigenous Rising Media, Indian Country Today Network. I mean, these are all incredible places where you can go, Last Real Indians, and you can find out that information. And I mean, do your own research. You guys come from the days of opening up a dictionary and going to the library, right? Checking things out on your own. If you don't like Google, then head to the library. Y'all are real familiar with them. I like them too. I prefer them to Google, and go do that research because like it was said earlier, the legacy that you are leaving is on a seesaw right now, and you can go one way or the other, and a simple search can be a catalyst for a greater change.
Yeah, go ahead.
I could make a comment regarding finding scientific information you can trust about the environment or climate change. One of the things that I found interesting in some of our politicians got in the habit of saying, I'm not a scientist, so I don't know about these things. To which I would respond, yes, we know you're not a scientist. That's why we have, as an intelligent government, NOAA and NASA and the EPA and the National Academy of Science. You should be listening to them. Their job is to advise you on the science. And all four of those agencies say, it's CO2, it's us, and it's urgent. And if you grab my handout, there's a lot of links to sites like NOAA and NASA, and that's the place to get, I would say, climate science that you can count on. A lot of what you hear on the blogs are from bloggers quoting each other and not quoting the science.
Melissa, do you want to add about the accuracy of treaty rights and environmental?
Since I've started practicing law, I've been disappointed with legal reporting in general. I can't think of a news source that I haven't seen misreport something, and again, it's NPR, it's the Star Trib, it's not necessarily the sources that maybe at one point in my life I would have expected to be misreporting things to that extent. But, I think, you can always go and look at court cases. I know a lot of people don't do that who don't practice law, but a good judge will try to write an opinion so that you can understand it. And there have been reports in the media that have been wrong that I think anybody could have understood just by going and looking at the source. So I guess just take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt, and it's the power of some of the social media that we have now. Although it's hard to distill legal concepts into those that kind of a forum. Sometimes you can see more directly some of the things that are going on, like some of the activity at the protests, and kind of get an idea for yourself of what's going on.
Do you want to comment on that, Kath?
I agree with Aaron. Indigenous Environmental Network, Honor the Earth are excellent sites for treaty right information. I would just say to get out in the streets, get to the Capitol and find out for yourself what's really going on. Why sit at home and look at the internet? Go experience it firsthand.
All right, anybody here, please comment on fracking, such as its association with earthquakes in north central Oklahoma. Anybody want to start on that?
I just want to mention Line 3 that we're talking about is a pipeline that brings oil from Canada, not North Dakota. So fracking is an issue, but right now this particular forum was on DAPL and Line 3 primarily. So again, there's two different kinds of oil. The fracked oil, the light sweet crude you can call it, and the heavy tar sands bitumen, and we're talking about Canadian tar sands bitumen tonight. I just wanted to clarify.
Go ahead.
Just another brief comment about fracking. On the one hand, if you've got well-delivered natural gas and you're burning that, it only produces about half of the CO2 that burning coal produces. So one of the cynical things about some of the oil companies being for a carbon fee and dividend is they would love to put coal out of business so that they can sell more natural gas. Unfortunately, when we do fracking, what they're discovering now that they're really working on a nationwide survey of gas leaks is that so much methane is leaking, just like oil is leaking everywhere. And methane is about 20 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than CO2. Fortunately, it is shorter lived in the environment, but it's devastating. So it's really not that much better than coal in the long run when you consider everything.
So here's a question I'm going to maybe modify just a little bit. It says, what can I do to convince my friends that climate change is a serious threat? They don't believe the overwhelming facts that climate change exists.
Neither do I. That was a joke. I think that one of the things that you can do is ask them how the winter was for them this year, right? When I lived in Minnesota, I had the Halloween where I got stuck at the Mall of America overnight because of the blizzard that we had, right? That was in October in Minnesota. I'm sure you all remember that.
1992.
And you look at our winters now, right? This is what we would call a mild winter. And why is it that we are not having any random snow, blizzards in the middle of April? And why is it that we are in a drought? And why is it that we are, dealing with eco-devastation in the state of Minnesota when we used to have an abundance of water? And why is it that we are, seeing temperatures rising? They don't have to believe in the overwhelming evidence, but if they are not a completely obtuse Minnesotan, they will realize that the water levels in our lakes are going down, that these rivers are slowly drying up, that our winters are not what they used to be, that our crops don't grow in the way that they should, and that ultimately, it is happening regardless of whether anybody wants to believe it or not. And if they want to keep contesting it, then they're going to die without water like the rest of us. And, maybe they won't have to deal with it in their next life. But if I come back in the way that I hope I do, I'm just going to be following all the climate change deniers around, bugging them.
Oh, Go ahead, Alan.
And I would just say that it's very challenging because an interesting book is called The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Disagree on Politics and Religion. And some of what it says is that some of the people who have a hardcore pick any belief, it's not because they have studied it or even maybe know anything about it. It's because that's what their tribe believes, and they're not going to risk being thrown out of their tribe. So it's very challenging with some folks, but I would say that probably the middle 80% of America is our target for education, because I've done quite a bit of public speaking now, and I have, in maybe 60 presentations, I've only had 2 people have kind of an angry, confrontational question, and in all other cases, people are really very interested, ask good questions, sign up to get literature after the fact. I think the biggest tragedy right now, one of the biggest tragedies in the country, is that our main media is simply not covering what is one of our largest existential threats ever for our future, and the media is just not covering it. So I would encourage you to especially get involved with 350, get involved with Citizens Climate Lobby. We need to make noise, write letters, and let our voices be heard. There's only one thing more powerful than money to a candidate, and that's 51% of his constituents.
That's right.
And when we talk to politicians, they almost invariably say, we're not hearing from anybody on climate change. Well, they need to hear from us all.
And it does work. I know what we were talking about, calling and leaving a message and talking to them, because my wife also works with animal issues, which are sacred animals, and what's going on now with 45's attack on our animals. Calling, talking to someone, and it blows their mind. Look what happened with healthcare. A lot of the people that voted for 45 ended up, they were going to lose their health care. So they were calling, and there's no new health care. There's no 45 care now. So calling works. Tell your friends. Tell everyone that'll listen. It does work. They do listen. They don't want to be voted out. Alan, you mentioned methane is worse than CO2. You mentioned agricultural, what's that word? Greenhouse gas. Do you mean animal agriculture? If so, can you elaborate?
Well, I'll try. There's a number of sources of methane. Probably the largest one is leaking methane from now the thawing permafrost up north and from leaking pipelines. That's probably the biggest source. But there is actually also a livestock source of methane that's not insignificant. And you know, one of the things that we might all be challenged to do is to eat less meat in general and less beef in particular, because beef just consumes huge amounts of oil in the form of corn and fertilizer and water. It's just kind of an environmental disaster, actually.
What I would like to do before we close is give everyone 2 minutes. And we're timing a couple of you.
All righty. One thing that I did want to put a plug in for is the March for Science, which is this Saturday. Here's a chance to get out and be part of the throng, to communicate with, in particular, our state legislators. But it's this Saturday, meeting at Cathedral Hill, downtown St. Paul at 10:30 a.m. There'll be a march then to the Capitol and speakers. And for a closing comment, that picture of my 3 little granddaughters, I hope that you all envision your kids and your grandkids asking you the same question. Are you helping to take care of our little planet?
I would echo what Alan says, about Lucy, even June. My niece, she lived with us in Standing Rock, and she's 3 years old at the time. And she's very articulate, very smart, and she knew exactly why we were there because every morning she wakes up for a drink of water and it's given to her. And every night when she goes to bed, she takes a bath, and she likes to brush her teeth, and she likes to grow things, she likes to garden, and she likes to tell people that she knows all of these things because she's 3, almost 4, and that she's really gonna be an adult someday. And when we were in Standing Rock, she would watch everything that was happening, and she would say, I'm not scared of you planes, I'm not scared of you drones, I'm not scared of you police officers. And I would, say, Riot, because that's her, her name. I'd say, Riot, why are you saying that to them? They can't hear you. And she'd say, they can hear me. And I'd say, well, how do you know that? And she'd say, technology. Right? And she knew that there was technology that existed, and she knew that there were people that were using that technology to kind of, curtail this life that she wanted to live, right? 3 years old. She's 4 now, and she can say that she's a veteran of Standing Rock, right? She can say that she was there on the front lines, not because anybody took her there, but because she was a child that knew the importance of water and wanted to be there. I can't impress upon everyone enough to tell you all that, it's great that you're sitting here, but it's even better if next time you bring your children and they bring their children, and even if they don't fully comprehend everything that's being said, that they're part of the conversation, because youth oftentimes are overlooked, and it's their futures that are ultimately in jeopardy.
I guess I would reiterate, call your legislature. I've been there for 4 years now, pretty much full-time during session. I see a difference. Climate change never used to be allowed to be discussed. It's actually coming up in conversation now. People are talking about it, and they're still laughing at it on one side of the aisle, but I don't know which side that is. I think it's the side that wants to support the fossil fuel industry. The Koch brothers have an amazing amount of lobbyists at the Capitol, as does Enbridge, as does all the gas stations. People can push against that. You can call. Tomorrow is the Water Action Day at the Capitol. It doesn't matter if you've made a reservation or not, if you can go to the Capitol tomorrow, or if you can't go, call your representative and your senator. If you don't know who they are, there's something called District Finder, or just type in Google, who is my representative, and it will come up in the state of Minnesota. But tomorrow we're fighting for clean water, and we have over 850 people coming. We need all representatives to be called tomorrow saying we care about clean water. So please do that, and all the things that affect it, whether it's agriculture, whether it's pipelines, whether it's mining, whatever. We care about clean water. And I would say if you take an action, you're going to feel better. If you stay at home and you worry about this, you're going to maybe not lose some sleep. You're going to say, what can I do? I'm one person. I'm insignificant. If you take an action and you take it with 50 other people, I can guarantee you will feel better. So come to a big action. Be there, do something, and you will say, we can do this, we can address this problem, we can solve it. So get out there.
Thank you so much. This has been an awesome night, and I really appreciate the League of Women Voters for putting on this program and asking us in the panel to share their truth. One of the things I just have to say about Standing Rock is, for us natives, Standing Rock is everywhere. It's on the Mounds Park where they want to put a splash pad. It's across the street. It's here. It's a movement. It's the biggest social movement that's happened since the 60s. And I'm proud to know people that are involved with it, and been really proud of this night. Red Brown's going to end us with a prayerful song in 1 second. I just want to make one quick announcement that the movie First Daughter of the Black Snake, during the film festival, that's about Standing Rock, and that's going to be playing at St. Anthony, Maine on the 22nd. And then there's another one, movie called Beyond Standing Rock. I'm not too sure, that's the 29th at St. Anthony, Maine Theater also. So it's a good experience, and I know there's going to be an online movie coming on too that's basically free. You can donate money to it, and from $1 to as much as you can afford, or stream that movie, and that's about Standing Rock too. And thank you all the guests, and thank you everyone for coming out here, and we'll end with a Red Bone. Thank you. Thank you very much. Also, just one last reminder, AM 950, Native Roots Radio, I'm awake, tune in. Good night, everyone.